Hi guys. All right, welcome back to my kitchen. We are on unit 2 now, which is quick bread. So today for our quick bread demonstration, I'm going to make some cheddar bay biscuits. They are the recipe from the restaurant chain Red Lobster. So if you've ever been to Red Lobster, they're pretty famous for their cheddar bay biscuits. So today I have a copycat recipe that we're gonna try out. I have everything behind me measured out already, so let's go ahead, jump over here and check out the ingredients. All right, so mise en place going on over here. Everything is in its place, ready to go. I think we've already talked about this, but when you read a recipe, you always use the ingredients in the order that they're listed in the recipe. So I went ahead and just set them right in order. So right here, I've got 2 cups of all-purpose flour measured out. I've got 1 tablespoon of sugar from that little sugar bin, big sugar bin. I've got 1 tablespoon of baking powder right here. I've got my garlic powder, my salt. For a little bit of kick, there's an optional ground cayenne red pepper. So I did decide to add that. It's just 1/4 of a teaspoon, so not that much. And lastly, I haven't measured it out yet, but I've got my buttermilk and of course my liquid measuring cup right there to measure it out in just a moment. I've also got my straight edge spatula that I obviously used to level off my flour when I was measuring that. And then my teaspoon, my tablespoon, other things over here. All right, so as always, when you are baking, the first thing that I need to do that my recipe tells me to do is to preheat my oven. In this recipe, I am preheating my oven to 450 degrees. Go ahead and do that over here. Okay, second thing the recipe tells me to do is to line a baking sheet with parchment paper. Unfortunately, I don't have any parchment paper at home right now. I thought I did, but I don't. So I use tin foil. It works as well. Same concept. That's okay as a substitute. Next thing I'm doing is in a large bowl, I'm combining my flour, my sugar, baking powder, salt, and cayenne pepper. So here's that bowl I showed you guys earlier. I've got all of my little custard cups or portion cups with my ingredients, cayenne pepper, salt. Should I get all of it? And it's just all going in. This is my baking powder, which is of course with this recipe, my leavening agent. Remember, your leavening agents are either baking powder, baking soda, or if you're making a yeast bread, you might be using yeast. But since we're in our quick bread unit right now, we will either be using baking soda or baking powder as our leavening agent. All right, so the next thing I'm doing in this recipe is combining my butter. It needs to be melted first, and I'll be combining that with my buttermilk. So I've got 1 stick of butter, which is also equal to a 1/2 cup, right? Since that's what my recipe calls for. Since I'm melting it in a smaller little portion cup or custard cup, I'm gonna go ahead and just cut it in half so it melts in there properly. And if you look at my butter and you're like, what? That looks like it's smaller than a stick of butter. It might appear that way on screen because it's quartered, so it's a little bit fatter than a typical stick of butter, but it's all the same. 8 tablespoons, 1/2 cup, right? When you're melting butter, it's very important not to melt it for too long. Do intervals when you're melting butter, so maybe pop it in for like 10 seconds and then check on it and then melt it for another like 10 seconds or whatever it might be depending on the power of your microwave. So let's get this melted. And butter is melted. It took exactly 30 seconds for me to melt this stick of butter. Next thing we're going to do is with our buttermilk, we are going to measure it out. I'm gonna shake it up before I open it. And we are doing, I believe it is a 1/2 cup or is it a full cup? It's 1 full cup of buttermilk that we're adding. 1 cup is 8 ounces. Here's my 1 cup or 8 ounce mark right there on my liquid measuring cup. And get down to eye level. Make sure I'm getting exactly at 1 cup. Looks good to me. 1 cup of buttermilk. All right, now that I've shaken it, it kind of got stuck up there, but I promise it's exactly 1 cup. I'm going to add my butter to my buttermilk. And buttermilk isn't a typical ingredient that people always have sitting around at their house. It was something that I had to go to the store and purchase. If you don't have buttermilk, you can always make some at home with lemon juice, actually. All right. My buttermilk and my butter are mixed together right here. Okay, next thing my directions tell me to do is pour the mixture over the dry ingredients and stir using a rubber scraper just until moist. Do that. Make sure I get it all out of there. You guys, it smells so good already. You should definitely make this at home if you're able to. It's normally goes over really well with students. Honestly, it's normally one of my students' favorite recipes that they do often go home and make. So if you are able to make it, I highly recommend it. Okay. Looks like everything is well mixed right there. Doesn't look like there's much separation. So the last ingredient that goes into the actual biscuits is my cheese. Actually, I have sharp cheddar cheese that I purchased, and I've measured out 1.5 cups right here. My recipe tells me to gently fold in the cheeses. So remember the term fold in. We also talked about that term when we were making our chocolate chip cookies. Fold in is just to delicately mix something into whatever it is that you're mixing. You're gonna do so by placing the cheese in the center and then like scraping around the edges and then kind of flipping the dough from the bottom to the top to kind of fold it over. So we're gonna fold it over quite a few times until it looks like it's well combined. Whenever you're adding a delicate ingredient, sometimes you might whip up egg whites and add them into something that you're making, or like chocolate chips. So chocolate chip cookies you make in the KitchenAid mixer, right, or the stand mixer. The reason that you don't want to blend them in like the other ingredients is because the chocolate chips will break up because they're a little bit more fragile and delicate. So that's why you want to fold them in. So this is starting to come together really nicely. I think my daughter's excited if you hear her yelling in the background. Here's what that looks like. So now our batter is complete and we're ready to go ahead and place them on our pan. Since I used foil instead of parchment paper, I did already spray a little bit of nonstick on it. Also, your recipe tells you to use a 1/4 cup dry measuring cup to place the biscuits onto the sheet so that they're all the same size. They're going to be about a 1/4 cup large. And the yield to this recipe is 10 biscuits. So I should come out with about 10 biscuits. I am going to spray my measuring cup just a little bit so that my dough doesn't get stuck in my measuring cup. So I'm just gonna use my rubber scraper and like kind of place a little bit into there. And it doesn't have to be like perfectly exact, something like that is good. The type of biscuit that we're making is a drop biscuit. So with drop biscuits, you just scoop them up and you drop them onto the pan. Just like cookies, you want to make sure that you have them well spaced out from one another. Seriously, it smells so good. And then I just drop it. got 10 biscuits. They are ready to go in the oven. They bake for 10 to 12 minutes. So I will set my... So now that the biscuits are in the oven, we do have a topping that we are going to make that we'll brush on top of them with our pastry brush when they're all done baking. Into the mixture goes 3 tablespoons of butter. This is actually a half a stick. This is different butter than the butter I showed you earlier. I've got a bunch of different butters in my house. I don't know why. But this is, that was my daughter. This is a half a stick of butter, or a fourth a cup or 4 tablespoons. So I'm going to, I got my cutting board out. I'm gonna grab my butter knife and I'm going to use the stick method, right? And a butter knife works for cutting butter too. You could use a paring knife if you wanted. I'm just gonna use a butter knife. And when, scoot this over, sorry, that is really hard to see. But my butter's right here. Again, these are like mini sticks. I don't know why I have different types of butter, just what I had purchased. I'm going to cut right here. I see the little dashes. I got 1 tablespoon, 2, and 3. So I'm gonna cut it off right there. Cut it even. And then I've got this extra tablespoon that I'll just wrap in saran wrap and put it back in my refrigerator. I've got another portion cup. Going to plop my butter in here and melt it. Butter is melted. To that, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of parsley flakes. So I've already gone ahead and measured out that 1 teaspoon. If you were using, these are obviously dried parsley flakes that were bought at a store in a bottle. If you were using fresh parsley, you would actually triple the amount and you would use 1 tablespoon, because we know there are 3 teaspoons in 1 tablespoon, right? But since we're using the dried stuff, it's a little bit stronger, so we only need 1 teaspoon. Again, if you use fresh, use 1 tablespoon. And then we're using our garlic powder again. This is a half a teaspoon of garlic powder. So I'm gonna add those to that. Gonna mix them up with my butter knife, that's fine. And this is our topping, and my house is starting to smell delicious. I'm going to keep this close by along with my pastry brush, and when they come out of the oven, we'll brush them on, and that will be in about 8 more minutes. All right, so they are out of the oven. They are smelling amazing. And the very last thing we do is with our butter, garlic powder, and parsley mixture and our pastry brush, we will brush each one with a generous amount of topping.